The wind howls across the frozen fields. Snow piles against wooden walls. Inside, a family sleeps beside their livestock, breath clouding in the dim light of dying embers. The temperature outside has dropped to 30 degrees below zero, yet the room remains warm enough to sustain life. This is not modern insulation or central heating. This is medieval Europe, where farmers faced a problem that could kill them: how to survive 6 months of winter in a house made of wood, earth, and straw. The solution was not a single invention. It was an entire system, built from the landscape itself, engineered through centuries of trial and fatal error. The question is simple. The answer is not. How did they do it? Medieval winter was not a season. It was a siege. From late autumn to early spring, the environment offered nothing. No crops, no warmth, no mercy. The peasant home had to bridge what researchers call the seasonality gap, the months when nature stops giving and starts taking. The human body generates about 100 watts of heat at rest, roughly the output of a dim light bulb. Wind, cold surfaces, and the night sky conspired to strip that heat away through convection, conduction, and radiation. The home was the only barrier between the family and freezing to death in their sleep. Builders worked with what the land provided. In the northern coniferous forests of Scandinavia and Russia, tall, straight pines and spruces dominated. These became log cabins, solid walls of stacked timber. In the deciduous lowlands of England, France, and Germany, oak trees grew irregular and twisted. Here, timber framing emerged, a skeleton of valuable wood supporting panels of cheap clay and straw. Everywhere, the earth itself became a building material. Soil formed the walls of pit houses, the infill of timber frames, and the layers of insulation on roofs. Medieval construction was a zero-mile supply chain. Transport was expensive. Materials were heavy. The geology and botany within walking distance dictated what could be built. The first line of defense was the ground itself. Early medieval farmers understood something counterintuitive. Burying the house made it warmer. The Grubenhaus, or sunken pit house, was dug half a meter to a full meter below ground level. This was not primitive laziness. It was thermal engineering. Below the frost line, the earth maintains a constant temperature roughly equal to the annual average air temperature. In northern Europe, this meant 8 to 13 degrees Celsius. When the air above ground plummeted to -20, the floor of the pit house remained stable at 10 degrees. The difference was survival. Heating a room from 10 degrees to 18 requires far less energy than heating it from -20. The buried house started the thermal race halfway to the finish line. Wind made the problem worse. Wind chill is a convective process, air moving across a surface and stealing heat. By sinking half the wall below ground, builders removed that surface from exposure. The house presented a lower profile to the wind. Less surface area meant less heat loss. Archaeological excavations reveal another adaptation. In some peasant dwellings, the earthen floor accumulated layers of straw, bracken, and fallen food scraps. When animals lived inside, their waste mixed into this organic mat. As the material decomposed, it generated heat through thermogenesis, the same process that warms a compost pile. Experiments suggest that these deep litter floors could raise room temperature by 1 to 2 degrees. The trade was sanitation for warmth. In the calculus of survival, warmth won. As the climate briefly warmed during the High Middle Ages, surface dwellings became more common. But the principle of earth insulation did not disappear. It migrated. Viking longhouses in the North Atlantic were banked with thick walls of turf and stone, sometimes 2 meters deep. This created thermal mass, a buffer that delayed the penetration of cold. Root cellars, dug beneath the floor or nearby, kept turnips and carrots from freezing using the same logic. The earth is warmer than the air. The walls were the primary barrier. Two distinct technologies emerged from two different forests. In the boreal north, the log cabin dominated. In regions with hardwood, timber framing prevailed. Both solved the same problem with different materials. Log construction relied on one critical detail, the corner joint. A gap at the corner would act like a siphon, sucking warm air out and pulling in cold air. The saddle notch was the simplest solution, a crescent cut into the underside of the upper log to straddle the lower one. It worked if the carpenter was skilled enough to ensure a tight fit along the entire length. The dovetail notch was more advanced, used for square-hewn logs. The geometry of the dovetail locked in two directions. As the wood dried and shrank over the years, the joint tightened, pulling the walls inward and closing gaps. This was not accidental. It was a self-sealing system that improved with age. Competent builders cut the notches with outward-sloping surfaces to shed water. Rainwater trapped in a joint would freeze, expand, and crack the timber, destroying the wall's integrity. Every detail mattered because failure meant death. No log is perfectly straight. To seal the gaps between stacked logs, builders used biological gaskets. Sphagnum moss was the premier material. It absorbed moisture, resisted rot due to acidic compounds, and compressed under pressure. When the wood expanded with humidity, the moss compressed. When the wood shrank, the moss expanded to maintain the seal. Modern testing shows that compressed moss has a thermal conductivity comparable to that of expanded polystyrene insulation. This was not a primitive substitute. It was a high-performance material harvested from bogs. In the Carpathian Mountains, builders braided long slivers of spruce wood into ropes and used them to chink the logs. This was more durable than moss and provided a decorative finish, though it demanded far more labor. In timber-framed regions, the wall was a composite system. The frame provided structure. The infill provided insulation. Wattle and daub was the standard fill. Hazel, willow, or oak staves were woven into a lattice, the wattle. This flexible frame absorbed wind loads without cracking. The daub was a mixture of clay, sand, and organic fiber. Animal dung was a critical ingredient. It provided enzymes and proteins that increased the plasticity of wet clay and the hardness of dry clay. It also introduced fine fibers that prevented micro-cracking. Straw acted as tensile reinforcement, like rebar in concrete, and created microscopic air pockets that improved insulation. A wattle and daub wall was not a high insulator by modern standards, but it had high thermal mass. It absorbed heat during the day from the sun or the fire and released it slowly at night. Experiments at reconstructed medieval villages show that thick daub walls dampened temperature swings. When the outside temperature fluctuated by 7 degrees, the interior fluctuated by only 4. The wall acted as a thermal flywheel, smoothing out the extremes. Some excavated sites in Germany reveal double-skinned wattle walls with a cavity filled with dry grass or leaves. This created a dead airspace, a technique that significantly outperforms solid walls. Air is a terrible conductor of heat when it is trapped and still. In Britain, the cruck frame revolutionized construction. A naturally curved tree was split in half to form a Gothic arch. The roof's weight transferred directly to the ground, bypassing the walls entirely. Because the walls were not load-bearing, they could be made thicker and lighter without risking structural collapse. The frame also allowed the house to flex during heavy storms rather than breaking. Heat rises. In a single-story home, the roof was the most critical surface for preventing heat loss. A poorly insulated roof would act as a chimney, drawing all warmth out of the living space. The medieval solution was thatch, a layer of organic insulation 30 to 50 centimeters thick. Water reed was the most durable material, though wheat straw and rye straw were common. The principle was cellular air trapping. The stems of these plants are hollow tubes filled with air. Bundled together in a thick mat, they created millions of tiny insulating chambers. A traditional thatched roof has a thermal performance equivalent to roughly 4 inches of modern fiberglass insulation. In the medieval context, this was vastly superior to slate, tile, or stone, all of which conduct heat rather than trap it. Thatch does not rely on being waterproof. It relies on pitch. A roof angle of 45 to 50 degrees ensures that water droplets run down the stems and drip off the eaves faster than they can penetrate the bundle. The steeper the pitch, the better the shedding. Before chimneys became common, the open hearth fire released smoke directly into the room. It rose to the roof and filtered slowly through the thatch. This created health problems, eye irritation, and respiratory damage, but it also preserved the roof. The smoke deposited soot and tar onto the straw. This coating hardened the thatch and made it unpalatable to insects, birds, and rodents. A smoke-blackened roof could last 50 years or more, while a clean thatch on an unheated barn might rot in 15. The smoke also accumulated in the roof space, creating a warm, dense layer of air trapped in the eaves. This plug of smoky air prevented rapid heat loss, acting as a secondary insulating layer above the living space. Thatching was often an additive process. Instead of stripping the old roof and replacing it, a new layer was pegged over the old one. Over generations, a roof could grow to over 1 meter thick, creating a massive insulating barrier. The tall-stemmed wheat varieties grown in the Middle Ages provided long, unbroken straws perfect for this purpose. Modern dwarf wheat, bred for combine harvesters, is useless for roofing. The synergy between agriculture and architecture has been lost. The engine of the home was fire. The history of medieval heating is the history of a struggle to capture the heat of combustion before it escaped the building. For most of the period, the central open hearth was standard. An open fire heats primarily by radiation, that is, line-of-sight infrared energy. It warms the side of the body facing the flames while the back remains cold. It does not heat the room's air efficiently. Researchers estimate that an open hearth is 10 to 15% efficient, meaning 85 to 90% of the heat energy escapes through the roof vent. The family slept and worked in a ring around the fire, the zone of survival. As the demand for comfort grew, builders began controlling the smoke. The smoke bay was a timber-framed channel, plastered with clay daub, built above the fire to guide smoke to a vent. This evolved into the smoke hood, a funnel made of wattle and daub. While the hood improved air quality by removing smoke, it also increased the stack effect, drawing warm air out of the room more rapidly. This required a stronger fire and increased fuel consumption. The true technological breakthrough was the heat storage stove. The Russian pek appeared in primitive forms in the early Middle Ages and evolved into a massive complex by the 15th century. Unlike a fireplace, the pech did not vent smoke directly. The hot gas traveled through a labyrinth of brick or clay channels, transferring its heat to tons of masonry. A single firing of 2 to 3 hours could heat the mass to 50 to 70 degrees Celsius. The stove would then radiate this heat gently for 24 hours. It was a thermal battery. The flat top of the Russian stove was the warmest place in the house, a dedicated sleeping platform for the elderly and children. It was a heated bed that required no blankets. In Germany and the Alps, the Kachelofen, or tile stove, performed a similar function. Ceramic tiles clad the masonry, increasing the thermal mass and providing a clean, radiating surface. These stoves achieved 70 to 90% efficiency. Contemporary chronicles noted that German rooms were too hot compared to freezing French castles and required significantly less wood. In the Baltic region and in monasteries, a form of the Roman hypocaust was revived. A furnace in the basement heated a pile of granite stones. Once the smoke cleared, a trapdoor was opened to let the clean heat rise into the living room. This allowed for smoke-free, highly efficient heating, vital for the sedentary work of monks and merchants. Perhaps the most alien adaptation was the byre dwelling, the longhouse where humans and livestock lived under the same roof. This was not sentiment, it was thermal engineering. A medieval cow was smaller than modern breeds, but it was still a biological furnace. A 450-kilogram cow produces 1,000 to 1,500 watts of heat energy continuously. A byre with 4 cows, a few pigs, and chickens could generate 5 to 6 kilowatts of heat, enough to keep a well-insulated longhouse above freezing even in deep winter. The partition between the human end and the animal end was often just a low wooden wall or a drain channel. The heat circulated freely. Experiments show that the presence of animals could raise the interior temperature by 5 to 10 degrees over the outside ambient temperature. The trade was air quality. The accumulation of manure created ammonia and humidity. Drainage channels cut into the floor carried liquid waste away from the living area and out of the house. Some houses featured rotating feed boxes or chutes that allowed animals to be fed from the human area, or a storage loft without opening doors to the outside wind. Every opening dumped heat. The byre dwelling was also about asset protection. In a subsistence economy, livestock represented the family's entire capital. Leaving them in a separate, unheated barn during a negative 30-degree freeze risked losing the herd. Bringing them indoors ensured their survival and allowed close monitoring of their health. Winter changed the social fabric of life. The outdoors became a place of danger. The indoors became a place of enforced intimacy. Privacy was sacrificed for warmth. Whole families slept in a single large bed, utilizing a heat hierarchy. Infants and the elderly occupied the center. Healthy adults took the edges. In Northern Europe, the box bed or cupboard bed was common. A bed enclosed in a wooden cabinet with doors. Closing the doors created a tiny insulated room within a room where body heat could raise the temperature significantly. Mattresses were stuffed with straw or chaff, which provided excellent insulation against the cold floor or bed frame. When the fire died down, the bed became the final fortress. Contrary to the idea that peasants hibernated, winter was a time of intense indoor labor. The heated room became a factory. Women spun wool and flax. Men repaired tools, whittled, and wove baskets. This work was critical for the household economy. Light was scarce. Candles made from beeswax were expensive. Tallow candles were smelly. The hearth fire often provided the only illumination. The rhythm of sleep was different. Families practiced the second sleep pattern, waking in the middle of the night to tend the fire and check the animals. Survival began before the first snow. November was called Blood Month in some regions. Farmers calculated exactly how many animals could be fed through the winter with the stored hay. The surplus was slaughtered. This provided meat, salted or smoked, for the family and removed the mouths that would consume precious fodder. A family might need 6 to 10 tons of wood to survive the winter. This had to be harvested, split, and stacked in autumn. Failure to secure this fuel meant death or the desperate burning of furniture and structural timbers by February. To the medieval mind, the cold was not just physical, it was spiritual. The house had to be defended against winter spirits, witches, and the encroaching dark. Timber beams in medieval houses frequently bear specific burn marks, teardrop shapes created by holding a taper against the wood. These apotropaic marks were placed near chimneys, windows, and doors, the orifices where evil might enter. By searing the wood with fire, the house was inoculated against the greater fire of destruction. In Slavic tradition, the domovoi was the house spirit who lived behind the stove. He was the personification of the house's warmth. He protected the fire and the livestock. In return, he demanded respect and food, a bowl of porridge left by the stove. When moving to a new winter house or at the start of the cold season, rituals involved transferring embers from the old stove to the new one, symbolically inviting the domovoi to continue his protection. To let the fire go out was to break the pact with the spirit world. The winter solstice marked the pivot of the year. The house was decorated with evergreens, holly, and ivy, not just for decoration, but as a reminder that life persisted even in the dead of winter. The Yule log, a massive block of wood burned continuously for the 12 days of Christmas, was a ritual of light magic intended to call back the sun. The physics of heat loss is universal. Human solutions to it show remarkable convergence across cultures separated by vast distances. The Yakut Balagan of Siberia, built on permafrost in the coldest inhabited place on Earth, used the same clay and dung daubing principles as the English cottage. But it adapted the geometry, using inward-sloping walls to minimize wind resistance and maximize heat retention in a climate far harsher than medieval England. The Viking longhouse featured turf walls 1 to 2 meters thick, the same earth-sheltering principle as the Grubenhaus. Different materials, different climates, identical physics. The medieval timber home was not a passive shelter. It was an active participant in survival. It was a complex system of thermal mass, biological insulation, and metabolic energy exchange. The house did not attempt to heat the entire volume to a uniform temperature. It created microclimates of heat. The stove, the bed, the byre, surrounded by buffer zones. Nothing was single-purpose. The smoke that warmed the house also preserved the roof. The animals that fed the family also kept the room warm. The animal's waste became the binder in the walls. The system was resilient. If the fire died, the stove's thermal mass and the earth walls kept the house from freezing for days. If the crops failed, the livestock provided a backup source of calories and heat. In the face of the Little Ice Age, the medieval farmer did not conquer winter. They negotiated with it. They built fortresses of wood, earth, and straw that allowed humanity to endure the long night, preserving the spark of life until the return of the sun. Across centuries and continents, the truth endures. When survival depends on it, humans do not wait for invention. They use what the landscape provides. They observe what works. They refine through generations. The medieval timber home was not primitive. It was optimized. Every joint, every layer, every shared breath with the livestock was a calculated response to the question that winter asked every year: will you live or die? The answer was written in moss, in clay, in smoke, in the warmth of sleeping cattle. The answer was the house itself,